The pharmacist looked relieved when I walked through the door. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Not surprised, not welcoming, relieved. Like someone waiting for a problem to finally resolve itself, I smiled politely anyway and stepped toward the counter. Hi. I'm here for my blood pressure refill. The young woman behind the register typed quickly into the computer, then paused. Oh, just that one word. Small, careful, dangerous. What? She looked uncertain suddenly. It says the prescription was already collected yesterday. My stomach tightened immediately. That's impossible. She clicked again. No, it was definitely picked up. By who? The pharmacist hesitated, then lowered her voice slightly. Your son. Cold spread slowly through my chest. My son does not pick up my medication. The woman blinked awkwardly. He's listed as your approved caregiver contact. Caregiver contact. Another harmless phrase quietly shifting authority away from me. I stared at her. I never authorized that. Now she looked uncomfortable. The notes say you requested family assistance due to memory concerns. Memory concerns. There it was again. Not confusion. Not illness. Concerns. Always vague enough to sound compassionate. Never specific enough to challenge directly. I have no memory concerns. The pharmacist gave the small, careful smile I had started fearing more than open hostility. Of course. Not agreement. Pacifying, I knew that tone now. I gripped the edge of the counter harder. What medication was picked up exactly? She turned the monitor slightly toward herself. Lisinopril. Cholesterol medication. Sleep support. Sleep support, I frowned immediately. I don't take sleep medication. Another pause, then carefully. You've been prescribed it since January. January. 6 months earlier. No. The pharmacist looked increasingly uncomfortable now. It's in your profile. Profile, such a cold word for a human life. I lowered my voice carefully. Can you show me the prescription history? She hesitated. Then glanced toward the older pharmacist working near the back. He approached quietly. Gray hair, soft voice. Professional concern radiating from every movement. What seems to be the issue? The young pharmacist explained quickly. The older man nodded slowly while studying the screen. Then he looked at me with gentle patience. Mrs. Bennett, according to our records, your son has been assisting with medication management for several months. Assisting, always assisting. Never controlling, never interfering, I stared at him. I did not approve that. He folded his hands carefully. The authorization notes indicate progressive forgetfulness regarding medication schedules. Progressive forgetfulness, not one missed dose, not one mistake. Progressive, a process, a decline. A narrative, my heartbeat slowed strangely. Not panic, recognition. Someone had already started building a medical story around me again. I want copies of everything. The older pharmacist hesitated. We may need to confirm with your caregiver contact first. There it was, caregiver, not son, not emergency contact, caregiver. As though I had already quietly shifted categories inside the system. My son is not my caregiver. The older pharmacist's expression softened further. Of course. Again that word. Again that tone. Like speaking to someone fragile, I suddenly understood something terrifying. The moment institutions start believing older adults may be confused, their objections begin sounding less reliable automatically. After 15 more uncomfortable minutes, they finally handed me printed medication records. I sat in my car afterward reading them while rain tapped softly against the windshield. 6 months of pickups, medication adjustments, sleep prescriptions I had never knowingly taken. Then I saw it. Prescribing physician Dr. Karen Lewis, my doctor. My stomach turned cold. No. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the second ring. Hey mom, normal voice, warm voice, that frightened me instantly. You picked up my prescriptions. Silence, not confusion. Silence. Then softly, you went to the pharmacy. My chest tightened painfully. You knew they'd tell me eventually. Eventually, not ever, eventually. I stared through the windshield at the gray parking lot. What exactly have you been doing? Daniel exhaled shakily. We were trying to help. We, always we. Collective concern, always sounds more legitimate than individual manipulation. I don't take sleeping pills. You weren't sleeping. How would you know? You called me crying at 3 in the morning twice last winter. Richard, of course. Last winter was the anniversary of my husband's death. I had insomnia for weeks afterward. Normal grief quietly transformed into clinical evidence. That does not mean I need medication management. You kept forgetting doses. One dose. More than one. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was again. Every ordinary mistake carefully counted and expanded until it sounded pathological. You told the pharmacy I was forgetful. We were worried, always worried, never wrong. Never controlling, just worried. I unfolded the printed records again. You added yourself as my caregiver. We needed access in case something happened. Something, not emergency, not illness. Something, the future again. Fear lives comfortably inside vague possibilities. Then another detail caught my attention. Automatic refill synchronization. Caregiver supervision enabled. Supervision. My entire body went still. Daniel had not only picked up medication, he had reorganized my entire prescription management around himself. How long has this been happening? Another pause. Then quietly, since February, the same month I accidentally forgot my blood pressure pill during Susan's birthday weekend. One forgotten pill. And apparently 6 months later, my own son now controlled medication access inside pharmacy systems. I lowered my voice carefully. What exactly did you tell Dr. Lewis? Long silence. Too long. Then softly, that you were struggling a little lately. Struggling, such a vague word, such a dangerous one, not incapable, not ill, just enough concern to change how everyone looked at me. I suddenly remembered something strange from months earlier. Dr. Lewis asking unusually careful questions during my annual appointment. Any confusion lately? Any trouble managing medications? Have your children noticed changes? At the time, I thought she was simply being thorough. Now my stomach tightened painfully. My own doctor had already been hearing stories about me before I walked into the room. And suddenly, I understood the most terrifying part. By the time older people realize systems have started doubting them, those systems are often already organized around someone else's version of reality. That night, I searched my medicine cabinet. Not dramatically, carefully, bottle by bottle, label by label. At first, everything looked normal: blood pressure medication, cholesterol pills, vitamins. Then I found the sleep medication. Small white bottle pushed behind the others near the back shelf. Prescription, Zolpidem, my name printed clearly across the label. Instructions, take nightly as needed for sleep support. My hands went cold. I unscrewed the cap slowly. Half empty. No. I stared at the tablets while my heartbeat pounded heavily in my ears. I had never knowingly taken sleeping medication in my life. Yet the bottle was half empty. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Several nights during winter when I woke feeling unusually foggy the next morning. At the time I blamed grief, poor sleep, stress. Now I wasn't sure. I walked slowly into the kitchen carrying the bottle. Then I noticed the pill organizer beside the coffee maker. The organizer Daniel bought me after Richard died. Just to make things easier. At the time I appreciated it. Now my stomach tightened. Daniel often refilled it himself whenever he visited. My chest suddenly felt tight. No. I opened the organizer carefully. Tiny white tablets sat inside Friday night, the same shape as the Zolpidem. For one horrible second, I could not breathe properly. I had been taking them. Without realizing, the room seemed to tilt around me slightly. Sleep medication can cause forgetfulness, grogginess, confusion, symptoms my son could later point toward as evidence. I gripped the counter harder, then another memory hit me. 3 months earlier, Daniel saying gently, "You seem more forgetful lately." At the time I thought maybe grief and stress were catching up to me. God help me. Maybe I only felt foggy because I was being medicated. I sealed the bottle inside a freezer bag immediately. Evidence. That word arrived instantly now. Not family misunderstanding. Documentation. The next morning, I drove directly to Dr. Lewis's office. The receptionist looked startled seeing me without an appointment. "Mrs. Bennett, I need to speak with Dr. Lewis immediately." Something in my voice must have alarmed her because within 15 minutes, I was sitting inside the examination room. Dr. Lewis entered looking calm but cautious. Again that careful expression, always careful now. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" I placed the sleep medication bottle onto the desk between us. "I never agreed to this." Her expression changed immediately. Not shock, recognition. That frightened me more than anything else. "You prescribed sleeping medication through my son, Dr. Lewis sat down slowly. "Daniel expressed concerns about insomnia and emotional distress. After my husband died. Yes, grief is not cognitive decline." The room went silent. Then carefully, "No one said it was." No, they never needed to say things directly. The implication did all the work quietly. I folded my hands tightly together. "Why is my son listed as my caregiver?" Dr. Lewis hesitated. "You seemed overwhelmed during several appointments." Overwhelmed, not incapable, not confused, overwhelmed. Such a small shift in language, such enormous consequences. "You discussed my medications with him. He's family. He is not me." Dr. Lewis leaned back slightly. "Eleanor, sometimes support systems help patients remain independent longer." Support systems, again. Everything always framed as preserving independence while quietly transferring control away from older people. I stared at her carefully. "Did you ever stop to ask whether the support system itself might become the problem?" That question visibly affected her, only slightly, but enough. Then I asked quietly, "Did Daniel tell you I was forgetting medication?" Another pause. "He mentioned increasing inconsistency." Increasing inconsistency, not one mistake, a pattern. Always patterns. I closed my eyes briefly. "How many doses did I actually miss?" Silence. Then quietly, "I don't know, exactly, no evidence, only reporting." I suddenly understood something terrifying. Doctors become vulnerable to family narratives too, not because they are careless, because concern sounds responsible. Especially when attached to older adults. Dr. Lewis spoke softly now. "You've seemed more anxious lately, because everyone keeps treating me like I'm disappearing." The room went completely silent. Then I placed the pill organizer onto the desk, beside the medication bottle. "Did you know he was placing these inside my organizer himself?" Her face changed instantly. "What? I never filled this prescription personally." For the first time since entering the room, Dr. Lewis looked genuinely unsettled, not professionally cautious, humanly unsettled. "That changes things." Changes things, I almost laughed. Of course it changed things, because suddenly concern no longer looked purely compassionate. Now it looked intrusive, possibly dangerous. I lowered my voice carefully. "Do you know what the cruelest part is?" Dr. Lewis remained silent. "For months, I started questioning myself." I stared toward the window quietly. Every time I forgot a word or felt tired or lost focus for a second, I wondered if Daniel was right. There it was, the real damage, not the medication itself, self-doubt. Fear spreads inward eventually. Once enough people begin watching older adults for signs of decline, the older adults begin monitoring themselves the same way. Dr. Lewis removed her glasses slowly. Then she admitted something that made my stomach turn. "Family reports influence physicians more than we like to admit." The room went silent, because finally someone said it plainly. Not conspiracy. Not malice, accumulation. Enough concern repeated often enough quietly reshapes institutional perception. I drove home afterward shaking with exhaustion, not confusion, humiliation. Because suddenly, I understood how fragile independence actually becomes once systems begin seeing older adults through the lens of possible decline. That afternoon, while sorting through pharmacy papers again at the kitchen table, another detail caught my attention. Caregiver pickup authorization signed February 11th. My signature sat beneath it. Or something close enough to resemble it. Cold spread through my chest instantly. I stared at the paper for nearly a full minute. No, no, Then another memory surfaced. February 11th was 2 days after my dental surgery. Heavy pain medication, anesthesia, foggy conversations. Daniel handled paperwork afterward while I rested. My pulse slowed strangely, not panic. Recognition. I suddenly realized something horrifying. My son had not only gained access to my medication, he had gained it during a moment when I was least capable of fully understanding what I was signing. And perhaps the most terrifying part of growing older is this: sometimes people do not need to prove you are incapable. They only need one vulnerable moment to start building systems around the possibility that you might become incapable someday. That evening, I called Susan. The moment she heard my voice, she asked immediately, "What happened now?" Interesting. Not if something happened. What? Because even Susan had started expecting new discoveries lately. I told her everything: the sleep medication, the caregiver authorization, the pill organizer. By the time I finished speaking, she sounded furious. "He put sleeping pills in your organizer without properly telling you. He says it was to help." Help! The way she repeated the word made me feel strangely relieved. Not because she agreed with me, because she still heard how wrong it sounded. I sat quietly at the kitchen table staring at the freezer bag containing the medication bottle. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. The silence on the phone deepened instantly. "That's what scares me most," Susan said softly. "What? You're starting to doubt your own instincts." There it was again, the real damage, not memory loss, psychological erosion. Once enough people frame ordinary aging as possible decline, older adults begin second-guessing themselves constantly. Susan drove over within the hour. The moment she saw the prescription bottle and paperwork spread across the kitchen table, her expression hardened immediately. "This is insane." The word nearly relieved me physically. Not my emotions, not my reactions, the situation. She picked up the caregiver authorization carefully. "February 11th, I nodded slowly. "After the dental surgery." Susan stared at the signature. "You were barely coherent that week." "Exactly. Not incapable, vulnerable. That distinction mattered deeply." Susan sat heavily across from me. "You know what frightens me?" "What?" "How easy this all sounds when people describe it calmly." "Exactly. Medication support, caregiver authorization, sleep assistance." Every phrase sounded compassionate. That was what made situations like this so dangerous. Control wrapped in concern becomes difficult to challenge without sounding unstable. The next morning, Daniel arrived unexpectedly. Again, the family rotated around me carefully, now like people monitoring a patient instead of visiting their mother. The moment he saw Susan sitting beside the paperwork, his expression tightened. "This isn't helping." "Helping, always helping." Susan stood immediately. "No. What isn't helping is secretly reorganizing her medical autonomy." Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. "You're making this sound malicious." I stared at him quietly. "Then explain it another way." He looked exhausted suddenly. "Older, smaller, not cruel, that somehow made everything worse. We were scared after Dad died." Richard again, always Richard. My husband's death had slowly become the foundation underneath every concern. "You stopped sleeping," Daniel whispered. "I was grieving. You called me crying constantly. My husband died. You forgot medications. One pill, more than one." There it was again. Every normal human mistake carefully counted and expanded until it sounded pathological. I folded my hands tightly together. "How many people know about the caregiver authorization?" Daniel hesitated. "Too long. How many?" "The pharmacy, your doctor." And another pause. "The insurance company." Cold spread slowly through my chest. Insurance, not just family anymore. Systems, that was the terrifying part. Once institutions begin organizing around the possibility of older adult decline, momentum builds quietly. I looked directly at my son. "What exactly did you tell them?" "That you needed support after losing Dad." "Support." Again, not control, not supervision. Support. He sat slowly across from me. "You weren't yourself anymore." The sentence hurt more than I expected, Because grief does change people, but grief is not disappearance. What does that even mean? You stopped going out as much. Because I was grieving. You forgot birthdays. One birthday. You seemed confused. Examples. I wanted examples desperately now. Specificity, reality, but fear survives comfortably inside vagueness. Daniel lowered his voice carefully. You left the stove on once. I blinked. No, I didn't. You thought you turned it off. No, I checked it twice because I was anxious. The room went silent, because suddenly I understood something horrifying. Even my fear of making mistakes had become evidence against me. I laughed softly, brokenly. So anxiety itself now counts as cognitive decline. No one said that. No. Again, they never needed to say things directly. The implication quietly reshaped everything already. Then Susan suddenly asked the question I think none of us truly wanted answered. Daniel, did you ever actually believe your mother had dementia? The room froze. Daniel looked away immediately, not toward me, toward the window. That silence frightened me more than any answer could have. Finally he whispered, I didn't know. Didn't know, not yes, not no, uncertainty. Fear had carried him into ambiguity, where ordinary human mistakes started feeling medically ominous. I suddenly realized how lonely that must have been too, watching every forgotten word. Every emotional moment. Constantly wondering, is this normal grief or the beginning of losing her? Fear had consumed him slowly. That understanding hurt terribly because it made hatred impossible. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face. After Grandpa, his voice shook slightly. I kept thinking maybe we missed signs too long. My father, Alzheimer's again, of course. Fear travels through families invisibly for decades sometimes. One generation's trauma quietly shapes how the next generation interprets aging forever. Susan softened slightly. That still doesn't justify this. I know. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he sounded genuinely ashamed instead of defensive. Then he quietly admitted something that made my stomach turn cold. The pharmacist suggested caregiver supervision herself. The room went completely silent. What? She said families usually notice problems before patients do. There it was again, the same sentence, the same logic, everywhere, families notice first. Which means disagreement automatically begins sounding like denial. I stared at the paperwork spread across the kitchen table. Medication records, authorization forms, prescription histories. Not one dramatic violation. Many tiny reasonable decisions slowly layered together until my autonomy no longer fully belonged to me. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. Nobody needed proof I was incapable anymore. Only enough collective concern to make institutions comfortable shifting authority gradually away from me. After Daniel left, Susan stayed late into the evening. Neither of us watched television. Neither of us touched dinner. We simply sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paperwork while rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Susan asked quietly, "What do you want to do?" The question should have felt simple. Instead, it frightened me. Because for months now, other people had been slowly deciding what was safest, smartest, and most responsible for me already. Wanting something for myself suddenly felt strangely unfamiliar. I don't know, I admitted softly. Susan looked at me carefully. That's not confusion. I stared at her. That's exhaustion. The distinction nearly made me cry. Not every uncertainty is cognitive decline. Sometimes people become overwhelmed because too many others are quietly reorganizing their life behind the scenes. The next morning, I called the insurance company directly. The representative sounded cheerful at first. Then she opened my profile. Immediately her tone changed, more careful, slower. That frightened me instantly. I'd like to remove caregiver supervision from my account, I said clearly. A short pause. Mrs. Bennett, are you certain you'd like to make those changes independently? Independently. The word landed heavily inside my chest. Yes, another careful silence. I may need verbal confirmation from your authorized family contact. There it was again, family contact, caregiver, support. authority spreading quietly outward through systems. My son does not control my insurance account. Of course, the representative said gently. Again that tone. Again that terrible gentle tone. As though emotional certainty itself might indicate instability, I gripped the phone tighter. Remove him. The representative hesitated, then softly, I'll note your request for review. Review. Not action, not correction. Review. As though my own autonomy now required institutional evaluation before restoration. After hanging up, I sat completely still for several minutes. Then suddenly understood something horrifying. The systems surrounding older adults are often designed to add protective oversight far more easily than they remove it. Fear creates momentum. And momentum becomes structure. At noon, Dr. Lewis called personally. Eleanor, I think we should talk. Interesting, not because she disagreed. Because now the situation itself had become uncomfortable professionally. She arrived at my house an hour later. Not as my physician exactly. As someone visibly trying to untangle where concern had crossed into intrusion. The moment she entered the kitchen and saw the paperwork covering the table, her expression darkened slightly. I've reviewed the pharmacy notes. And, she sat down slowly, there should have been clearer communication. Communication, not consent, not authority, communication. I almost laughed from exhaustion. You prescribed medication through my son. He reported severe insomnia and emotional distress. After my husband died. Yes. Would you have prescribed sleep medication to a grieving 50-year-old man based entirely on his daughter's concern? The room went silent instantly. Because finally we reached the real issue underneath everything. Aging changes interpretation. Dr. Lewis removed her glasses slowly. No, she admitted quietly. There it was, the truth. Not malicious discrimination, not deliberate cruelty, just institutional bias wrapped in caution. I stared at her carefully. So what exactly changed? She hesitated. Older patients are considered higher risk regarding medication adherence and cognitive complications. Risk, again, always risk. Fear transformed into procedure. Then Dr. Lewis admitted something else that hollowed me completely. Your son sounded very credible. Credible, interesting word, not truthful, not correct, credible. And suddenly, I understood the terrifying imbalance underneath everything. Concerned adult children are often treated as objective observers. Older adults defending themselves are often treated as emotionally compromised. I folded my hands tightly together. You all trusted him more than me. Dr. Lewis looked genuinely pained now. That's not entirely fair. No, I whispered, it's exactly fair. The room remained silent. Then she quietly said, You're not the first patient this has happened to. That sentence chilled me instantly. How often does this happen? She sighed heavily. More often than people realize. Not dramatic abuse, not criminal exploitation, just gradual shifts, family concern, medical caution, protective systems, each step individually reasonable. Together capable of quietly eroding autonomy before anyone notices. At around 4 that afternoon, Laura arrived unexpectedly. Again. The family orbited around me constantly, now like people stabilizing a situation instead of visiting their mother. The moment she saw Dr. Lewis sitting at the kitchen table, her face drained immediately. You talked to her? Yes. Laura looked exhausted before even sitting down, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling slightly. Fear had been consuming her too. I never wanted you hurt, she whispered, and I believed her. That was the tragedy, no villains. Only frightened people, slowly normalizing increasingly invasive behavior, because every step sounded compassionate. Laura looked toward the medication bottle, sitting inside the freezer bag. When you stopped sleeping after Dad died, her voice cracked slightly, you sounded so lost. Lost, not grieving, not lonely, lost. The language itself had shifted long ago. I looked directly at my daughter. Do you know what the cruelest part is? She remained silent. You taught me to fear my own mistakes. Laura's face crumpled immediately, not dramatic crying. Devastated crying. Because finally she understood the real damage, not the medication, not the pharmacy records, self-surveillance. For months, I had been monitoring every forgotten word, every distraction, every emotional moment, wondering if maybe everyone else saw something I could not. Fear had moved inside me too. Then Laura whispered something that nearly broke my heart. "I started watching you all the time." There it was, the truth, not because she stopped loving me. Because she loved me so much, she became unable to see me without searching constantly for signs of losing me. And perhaps that is the cruelest transformation fear creates inside families. Sometimes people become so terrified of future decline, they stop allowing older adults to simply be human in the present. For a while after that conversation, everyone became painfully careful around me. No more medication reminders. No more helpful questions. No more quiet discussions about support systems. At first, the silence felt like relief. Then eventually it began feeling sad instead. Because underneath the caution, I could still sense the fear lingering quietly inside the family. Fear does not disappear simply because evidence fails to support it. It leaves habits behind. 3 weeks later, I went back to the pharmacy myself. Not because I needed medication immediately. Because I needed to walk into that building without feeling afraid. The same young pharmacist stood behind the register. The moment she recognized me, her expression shifted awkwardly. Not suspicious now, embarrassed. "I updated the profile personally," she said quickly. "Your son no longer has caregiver pickup authorization." Authorization. Interesting how such a small administrative word had reshaped my entire life for months. I nodded politely. "Thank you." She hesitated. Then quietly added, "I'm sorry if things became uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Such a tiny word for humiliation. Still, I appreciated the apology, not because it fixed anything. Because she sounded human again instead of procedural. While waiting for my refill, I noticed an older man arguing softly with another pharmacist near the consultation counter. He looked frustrated. Confused, embarrassed, his daughter stood beside him speaking gently but firmly. "He forgets doses all the time." The man immediately protested. "I missed one pill." One pill. My chest tightened instantly. I knew that sentence now, not medically, emotionally. The pharmacist nodded sympathetically toward the daughter while typing notes into the system. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Not villains, not conspiracies, patterns, fear repeating itself quietly everywhere, older adults becoming discussions instead of participants. I left the pharmacy feeling strangely hollow afterward. That evening, Ethan came over unexpectedly after soccer practice while Laura ran errands nearby. We sat at the kitchen table eating grilled cheese sandwiches while rain tapped softly against the windows again. At one point, I accidentally knocked my tea spoon onto the floor. The sound startled both of us. For one terrible second, Ethan froze automatically. I saw it instantly. The calculation, the subconscious fear, then he relaxed. "You dropped it," just that. No concern, no analysis, no hidden meaning, normal. I smiled softly. "Yes." I did. Later, while we played cards afterward, Ethan suddenly asked, "Grandma, are you sick?" The question caught me off guard. No, then why were Mom and Uncle Daniel so worried? Children always ask the cleanest questions. No careful language, no institutional vocabulary, just truth stripped bare. I thought for a long moment before answering. Sometimes when people love someone very much, they become scared of losing them. Ethan nodded slowly. Like when Dad thought I broke my arm last year but it was only bruised. I almost laughed. Yes, a little like that. He looked down at the cards quietly. But they made you sad. The simplicity of the sentence nearly broke me, not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. Fear had not protected me. It had isolated me inside constant observation. After Ethan left, I stood alone in the hallway looking at the family photographs lining the wall. Richard holding Laura at the beach, Daniel learning to ride a bicycle, Christmas mornings, birthdays. An entire life, still mine, still intact. Yet somehow for months, everyone around me had slowly started preparing emotionally for my disappearance while I was still standing directly in front of them. The following Sunday, the whole family gathered at Laura's house again for dinner. At first, conversation felt stiff. Everyone monitored themselves carefully now, too. No one wanted to sound controlling. No one wanted to sound dismissive. Halfway through dessert, Daniel suddenly forgot Megan's cousin's name during a story. He paused, snapped his fingers once, looked embarrassed. Then Ethan immediately asked, "Do you have memory problems too?" The room went silent. For one brief second, panic flashed across Daniel's face automatically. Then realization hit him. Hard, normal human mistake, normal human forgetfulness, nothing more. Laura covered her mouth suddenly, eyes filling with tears. Because finally, maybe for the first time in months, both my children experienced what I had been living inside constantly. The instant fear, the instant self-doubt. The terrifying awareness that ordinary imperfection could suddenly mean something larger in other people's eyes. Daniel laughed shakily after a moment. "I think I'm just tired. Just tired." Not declining, not deteriorating. Human, I watched understanding slowly settle across the table. Not dramatic revelation, something quieter. Humility. After dinner, while everyone cleaned the kitchen together, Laura accidentally called Ethan by Daniel's name. Again, silence flickered briefly through the room. Then Ethan laughed. "Mom's forgetting people now too." This time, nobody froze. Nobody exchanged worried glances. Nobody started quietly building narratives. Laura laughed too eventually. Real laughter. Relieved laughter. And I suddenly realized something important. Fear loses power the moment families begin allowing ordinary human mistakes to remain ordinary again. Before leaving that night, Daniel hugged me longer than usual near the front door. Then softly whispered, "I'm sorry I stopped trusting your version of yourself." The sentence hurt terribly because it was true. That was the deepest wound underneath everything, not medication. Not paperwork, not pharmacy systems, recognition. My children slowly stopped trusting that I understood my own mind better than their fear did. After everyone left, I drove home alone beneath soft rain and empty streetlights. When I reached the house, I stood quietly in the kitchen for several minutes listening to the refrigerator hum in the silence. Then I opened the medicine cabinet slowly. Blood pressure pills. Vitamins, no sleeping medication, just my life again. My decisions, my body, my reality, such ordinary things. Yet I stared at those shelves for nearly 5 full minutes, because I finally understood how fragile ordinary autonomy actually becomes once enough people start interpreting aging through the lens of possible decline. And perhaps that is the most terrifying thing about growing older. Sometimes people do not need to prove you are incapable to slowly take pieces of authority away from you. They only need to become frightened enough to believe caution matters more than your own voice.